Today's episode of Adapt and Respond is sponsored by Surely This Ain't Shandy, the only alcoholic beer brewed with the tears of an ex-girlfriend who just saw you glow up, the might and power of Grayskull, the dirty hippie mane of a microbrewer gone bankrupt. Surely This Ain't Shandy ain't for the weak. Enjoy Surely This Ain't Shandy responsibly. Today's episode of Adapt and Respond is sponsored by Ricardo's Huevos Rancheros in Turley, Oklahoma, the only restaurant in Green Country where the tagline is wet and saucy. That's right, wet and saucy. Get your eggs scrambled and milk swirled at Ricardo's Huevos Rancheros today. Today's episode of Adapt and Respond is sponsored by Benjamin Banneker College, the only HBCU with a BBW and big, bad bachelor's in what it do, pretty mama. At the BBC, you can erect your education with such foundational skills as mackin', what's crack-a-lackin', is that your man or just your baby's daddy, and accounting. At the BBC, students gain the knowledge and experience to get money, rock ice, write prose, new money, new whips, new clothes, keep money everywhere we go. So if you're about trying to get this paper and get your degree, walk on down to the BBC and bring cash. Now, let's get started with the show. What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. If this is your first time watching Adapt and Respond, thank you for joining us here. We talk college football year round. If you're into that, consider joining the more than 184,000 subscribers to Adapt and Respond, a college football podcast. You can also listen to us on Spotify and Apple if that's what you would enjoy more, but we're always going to be YouTube first. We're always going to YouTube exclusives. Today on the episode of Adapt and Respond, that is Thursday, June 18th. Talk with Shehan Jeyarajah, who's national college football writer at CBS Sports and a guy that I came up with in this business. Very talented, wrote the definitive profile of Cody Campbell. Talked with him about Texas Tech. Talked with him about what's next for Cincinnati, a bit about this Protect College Sports Act, and even how good can Lane Kiffin and LSU be in 2026. But I want to get started by just talking about the news in college football, which is that the Protect College Sports Act came out of the Senate Commerce with a 19-9 vote to get it to the floor, to the Senate floor. This is the second bill in as many months to reach the Senate floor, but the last one got there and was immediately pulled before the vote. Since then, we've had this bill that was created that largely has two major drawbacks to it as I see it. Right? The first one is it doesn't necessarily prevent big-time college football programs from leaving their conferences and joining a super league. In fact, its anti-super league language probably gets you closer to saying, oh, if you hit this threshold, you can opt out. So as it's been reported, the biggest concerns from the Big Ten, the SEC, are that private equity or third parties can still poach members, while the current bill says in the power leagues, like if the Big 12 hits $700 million in revenue, which it could, that it would be frozen. Again, this anti-Big Ten SEC language is also a drawback in that they don't want you to cap how many teams they can add. You're asking them to stay put. Senator Maria Cantwell, who's co-authoring the bill, said this about the opposition for the Big Ten, the SEC. What we did today says we're not going to let the most powerful and richest conferences dictate to the rest of America what's going to happen to 500,000 athletes. Strong. Charlie Baker, also the NCAA's president, coming out strong in support of this bill, saying today's vote is a powerful statement to the growing bipartisan support for targeted intervention from Congress to stabilize college sports transfer eligibility and agent rules. The NCAA looks forward to building on this important development to pass most effective bill for all 550,000 student athletes in the coming days, the NCAA will provide member schools and student athletes with analysis of the latest draft of the legislation and next steps. We are thankful for all of the advocacy from student athletes and members and for the leadership of Senators Cruz, Cantwell, Coons, and Schmidt. Again, on the whole, and I talked with Shehan about this a little bit later, this is probably a good thing because it gets us out of this really awful environment that we think we're in, and some people would agree. But some of the things that I've found to be more interesting, other than those two at the top with major problems, are the ways in which it is already trying to attack gambling in a very real and cool way. There's an amendment in the Protect College Sports Act that says players would not be allowed to use app-based event prediction markets such as Kalshi and Polymarket for games. And I think that that is for the best, right? Just take it off of their plate altogether. You can, and I'm sure that that's a lot of fun for you, right? The things that you're able to bet on, being basically whatever you can think about for the most part, or at least whatever these Polymarkets and call sheet are willing to put up on their boards. But I also think that there's an interesting amendment to look at when it comes to Army-Navy, right? No college football playoff or bowl game can be on TV during its window. The window starts 1 hour before the kickoff and ends 30 minutes after the game officially ends, which is not actually that big a deal. Like, what it makes room for is you to play football after Army-Navy is over, after that window is closed. And I don't know that that's a bad idea either, because it gets back onto course with college football playoff extending to 24 teams and trying to make use of that second weekend without prolonging the postseason any more than it has to. You're also getting great support for this bill from the AFCA. Craig Bohl, who is president of it, told CBS Sports, the American Football Coaches Association applauds Chairman Cruz and Senator Cantwell for working in a bipartisan way to produce a bill. The senators and their legislative staff have done an excellent job of including stakeholders in the process. This is great. This is all well and good. This is not at all awful. That said, I still am not optimistic that this thing even makes it out of the Senate. But if it does and makes it out of the House of Representatives, then we can talk about it. But I think one thing that you can expect is more bills like this if this one doesn't pass. We're going to get to a place where I think Congress and or the NCAA and its members want this to go away, especially as the price of brick continues to go up. There's one more amendment in here that I thought was really interesting, and that was how much you can expect college football coaches to get paid. And that's another one where I'm like, okay, what senator is going to vote for this? Who's going to curtail how much money their college football coach can get paid? You're also looking at the price of moving conferences is going to change and or move. Like July 1, ACC exit fees go from $165 million to $147. That's a lot of money, but you could still be enough to trigger, say, a Florida State to an SEC or Clemson to an SEC, and that would give them 18 teams on par with the Big Ten. This is not something that gets to happen if this bill passes. Expect more conversations like this. All right, on the other side, let's talk to Shehan Jeyarajah about college football and what we can expect next from Texas Tech and how good they might be. I'm pleased to be joined by CBS Sports national college football writer Shehan Jeyarajah. Shehan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Shehan wrote a definitive piece about Cody Campbell and Texas Tech, and that has been, the news for the past, it's got to be 2 months now. And I wanted to have Shehan on to talk about Texas Tech, talk about Cody Campbell, and what his overall thoughts are about this. So I'm going to start with this, Shehan, just off the rip. Do you think Sorsby and Tech reached the right conclusion?
I do. I think that In a lot of ways, this was inevitable. I
Mhm.
think for many reasons, this was the right decision for both sides. I mean, look, I think that Texas Tech really wanted to stand by their guy. Obviously, yes, because they invested a lot into him and because he was going to be their starting quarterback. But I think they also just like want that reputation of being a program that fights for like what's theirs. But I think that also like the pressure was not going to die down. I think that maybe both Sorsby and Texas Tech underestimated to a certain extent
Mm.
how angry national college football was going to be, that they'd have cancellations from Georgia and Nebraska, that people in the Big 12 would be pressuring them and trying to sanction them. Like this grew into something bigger than I think that people expected it to be in Lubbock. And so, it was just never realistic to me, the idea that a player who admitted to gambling on his own games would be allowed to play major college football after it. And again, it took a while. It was a long process. I think that most people, again, in Lubbock thought that it would end with him not getting eligibility from a judge a couple weeks ago, but here we are. And I think that, again, this was the only way it could have ended.
It certainly has lit a fire under the rest of us because now we're talking about things that really were always underneath college football, but had not risen to this level in part because of name, image, and likeness, in part because of revenue sharing, and certainly as there is no quote salary cap in our sport. But I wonder, do you think the NCAA is at fault for this fiasco that is surrounding Brendan Sorsby and his exit from Tech?
Well, there's two parts of this, right? There's one, the landscape, and the NCAA is fully responsible for the landscape. That they're sitting here, 100 years into existence and not prepared for this moment of fighting eligibility, fighting compensation, all this sort of stuff, right? But if we go to the micro level, we talk about the situation. I mean, the reality is, to a large extent, this is the fault of an individual judge who made a ruling that I think that we all disagree with, right? And again, like whatever you want to say about what Tech has said, and they've said some stuff that I think they probably shouldn't have said, but like it is true. He went through a legitimate legal process to get his eligibility. And again, the NCAA had no real right to prevent him from being suspended after that injunction came down. Texas Tech had every right to play him after the injunction came down. I think we all just agree, like, I don't think the judge took into account seriously enough. One, what the case was. Two, how serious the rule is. And three, what kind of impact it could have short and long term on college athletics. So again, like the world that we live in is certainly the fault of college athletics and the NCAA for not being prepared and frankly being flat-footed at this point. But when you start talking about this individual situation, I mean, every stakeholder acted rationally in my mind, except for the judge, where that was just to me inexplicable.
We talked a bit about Tech and what they did. The NCAA, I think, needs an enforcement arm. I'm not so hard on them, mostly because they don't have one, and their members said they want these bylaws, which means that they want them enforced, which means that they will put up with them being enforced, and that just hasn't been the case. However, I am curious what you think might happen with Cincinnati in particular. It's we're recording this on Thursday. On Wednesday, Brendan Sorsby's agent goes on 105.3 The Fan in Dallas and says that Cincinnati knew that his client had a gambling addiction. And Matt Hayes at USA Today reported they had knowledge of this as soon as August 2025. What, if anything, can we expect from the NCAA in Cincinnati?
Yeah, this is what's really interesting, right? So what has been said in filings, at least by Cincinnati, and I think by the Big 12 as well, is that Cincinnati says that they got an alert, essentially, that Brendan Sorsby tried to log into Prize Picks when he was a student at Cincinnati. In their eyes, and according to their story, they did not have any additional information other than that. Now, again, like you said, Brendan Sorsby's agent has come out a little bit stronger than that. And certainly, I mean, even though this is not an active player in college football anymore, like I think it is worth, the NCAA with whatever power that they have trying to look in and see, is this something that happened? Is this something that we should be responsible for? And look, I mean, it's complicated, right? Because again, this is not an athlete who's going to play college football heading forward. He's been ruled permanently ineligible. But like, again, it does start to bring up the question of who knew what when. At this point, again, we don't have any proof that Cincinnati necessarily knew about the gambling addiction or the scale or scope of any of this sort of stuff. But when you're dealing with a situation like this, I mean, there does start to become a point where you start to ask, like, how could they not have known something, right? How could Indiana not have known something? I mean, there's a lot of these schools across the country that use these monitoring services, right? It's like USA Integrity is kind of the big one. I think Prohibit or something like that is the one that Cincinnati was flagged by, right? So, like, it's a little bit confounding to me, the idea that none of this stuff could have been flagged before. But again, unless we're going to do a full-scale investigation, which I would like, certainly, but, is that something that's going to happen? It's hard for me to say Cincinnati should receive X or Y when we just don't really know definitively what they could have known.
Which, to your point, I think works for them and works in favor of the Big 12. And I think the read I get when I ask people about this in and around the Big 12 is that we would very much like this to not go away, but we would like to be talking about football, and we would like to solve some football problems, as well as some logistical problems, but it's not, right? And I kind of want to get back to Texas Tech on that point. You wrote this piece that I encourage everyone to go read, published about a year ago, called West Texas Boom, Inside Texas Tech's Bold All-In Bet on NIL and the Billionaire Landman Responsible. I love this piece. It's very, very good. What's next for Cody Campbell and Texas Tech, that association, that family dynamic that's not going anywhere, that feels extremely fierce, but sometimes misguided?
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? I mean, like you said, we were talking a little bit before the show, and I mean, this was kind of like, I guess you could say, Cody Campbell's introduction to the big stage was the story that I wrote last year, right? And you always hope that a year after that, some of this stuff is still going to be relevant. And so I think that, look, if you go back and read my piece, like, he is somebody who obviously is getting kind of billed as an oil man, but, like, he really is, like, I described him as a landman in the piece, right? He's somebody who was a speculator, went and bought up leases at times when the market was at its absolute lowest, and flipped them when it was at its highest, and that's how he made billions of dollars, right? And that is, in my mind, critical to understanding his plan within Texas Tech and within college football, right? He views this as a distressed asset that he can put his stamp on and ultimately turn into something different, both, again, in the context of Texas Tech and of college football. And I think what's been interesting about these past 2 months is that, again, he is kind of caught between these two competing interests that he wants, right? He wants Texas Tech to, obviously, as an individual team, be in the best position they can be. He also wants to be the guy, quote unquote, who saved college athletics, right? And he put out all these ads on national television to try to make that case. He certainly has been in President Donald Trump's ear this entire time trying to make that happen. I think that when you look at stuff like some of these roundtables and the push for the Protect College Sports Act, like, a lot of this stuff, I think, is spurred by Cody Campbell coming to the table, right? And so I think it's funny. He obviously has had so much success as a businessman. I think that sometimes you jump in and think, I can do this. I can solve this. I'm the guy. I'm uniquely positioned to do it. But you start seeing these sort of contradictions that come up when you actually have to deal with the logistics of it. And, and Cody Campbell said, and he said it in his 3-page letter where he announced that Brendan Sorsby would not be playing. Where, by the way, like, he referred to himself a whole lot in the first 2 pages of that piece. He wants to be clear, like this bill would have prevented the Brendan Sorsby situation. Brendan Sorsby would not have been allowed and able to sue the NCAA because the NCAA would have federal ability to make rules against gambling and wagering. So he's kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth right now. But again, it's because he has these competing interests.
I found it fascinating just how Cody Campbell entered into the college football space. I also was trying to gear people toward Landman. If you've seen it on CBS, you can kind of get a feel for how this man made his fortune and came up. And I also get a kick out of any person that sells their fortune for $1 billion and says, okay, now my favorite college football team is about to get really good. That's college football as we know it. And that's how I entered the sport. I do want to ask in as far as that's concerned, Texas Tech going forward, we know that Cody Campbell is going to be associated with what they do. We know that their administration, at the very least, is in lockstep, even if I don't agree in the direction I'm always going. But now we got to play football, which means unless I'm wrong, Kirk Francis got to start your first 2 games because Will Hammond will not be ready to go. And if he's ready to go, it's not as soon as week 3. So is Texas Tech still the best team in the Big 12?
Yeah, Tulsa's own Kirk Francis, of course. I do think that they are the best team in the Big 12. I think it is a little closer than it would have been with Sorsby in the lineup. The way that I've kind of described it is like, I think Texas Tech with Sorsby and without all these questions and stuff around, they were like 95% favorites to win the Big 12. I think they're like 60% favorites. BYU is really good. It would not surprise me at all if they were to jump up. I think those 2 teams, though, are a head above the rest of the conference right now, heading into 2026. Even with Sorsby in the lineup, I mean, this is a Texas Tech team that, one, should still be really good on defense. Not as good as they were last year because, I mean, that collection of defensive line talent that they had was unmatched by just about anybody in college athletics last year. They're still going to be really good, though, on the defensive line. I actually think they're going to be better at linebacker, even after the loss of Jacob Rodriguez. And on the back end, I think they'll actually be an improved team. So they're not going to be top 3 in the country in defense like they were last year. They're not going to hold Oregon underwater like they did, but they're going to be one of the better, let's call it a top 10 defense in the country. Offensively is actually where I think that even without Sorsby, there's some real optimism. I've sort of been of the opinion you can't portal an offensive line in 1 year, that you can't do that in 1 year. I think it's a multi-year process, and Texas Tech is heading into year 2 of that process. They bring back 3 starters on the offensive line, a 4th guy who would have started last year if he wasn't out for the season. They've got 2 tackles that they think are going to be NFL players, and they've got one of the better running back rooms in the country as well, led by Cam Dickey. So this was a team that, again, I think worst case scenario, let's say that Will Hammond's terrible and Kirk Francis is terrible, which I don't expect. Like, they're going to be able to run the ball down the throat of a lot of teams in the Big 12. And especially with having one of the easier schedules in the conference and not having to play BYU and Utah, I think that that's going to put them in a really good position to at least likely make it back to the Big 12 title game, likely against BYU, and whatever happens from there happens.
Will Hammond is a stud. Kirk Francis is not. That's the long and the short for me. Like, that's it. I think Will Hammond is as good as Brendan Sorsby, if not as experienced, right? We all want that. But if Kirk Francis gets you through Washington State and Oregon State by handing the ball to Cam Dickey, and then let that defense you talk about eat, they're going to be okay. I think that everything you're saying is true, meaning they go from being a 14-point favorite in every game they play to me to maybe 5. Just make it a funny number. We'll see. The Protect College Sports Act this Thursday came out of the Senate Commerce 19-9, right? And I was really curious about just how this is going to go over, because the last time we got this close to a bill like this that is going to try to rein in college sports, it made the floor only to get pulled. And I am not optimistic that this is the bill to get across the line to change the entire environment around college sports. So start with this. Do you think that the Protect College Sports Act is a good thing on the whole for college football?
Yeah, I think that it largely would, let's put it this way, it would be an improvement versus where we're at right now, right? I think that for a lot of people, and even to tie this back to the conversation we're having, right? Like, I think that the Brendan Sorsby situation was the emperor really has no clothes anymore. Like, it's over, right? And I think that that's spurred a lot of people to sort of go, we have these complaints, we have these problems with the bill. I mean, to be fair, like, there's some things in the bill that feel insane to me, right? Like the idea that no conference who makes over X amount of money is allowed to realign anymore. Like that does not feel serious. It doesn't also feel all that good a situation for, the Memphises or Tulanes that might want to get into one of these conferences, frankly. And then obviously like the whole Lane Kiffin provision in the bill, you can't leave your team before I don't know, man, whatever. Like, we'll see what kind of happens with that. But like, I do think that having some level of federal guideline and guidance and enforcement is a good thing. I think that, empowering the NCAA, like you said, to have a little bit more of an enforcement arm and have some real teeth behind them is a good thing. I think that at this moment, right, we are in like the true wild west of enforcement, right? Like there is just nobody can do anything at this point. I mean, we're obviously the Sorsby situation is one among them, but there are so many cases of guys going to courts and trying to get this extra eligibility and make, again, it's just, we can't have this level of piecemeal. We have to have a set of universalized standards. So from that perspective, I think it would be an improvement. I also don't think it would certainly solve every issue facing college athletics, but I think that it would at least give us a little bit of a better framework than what we have right now.
I want to do a short lightning round before I get you out of here. Just yes or no questions off the top of your head. Cool?
Let's do it.
All right. Is LSU going to win the national championship?
No, I don't think they will.
Is Oklahoma going to win a college football playoff game?
This is a big year for them. This is a big year. I'm going to say yes, but again, they got to, this has to be the year that the offensive line is really ready for prime time.
From your mouth to God's ear. Jeremiah Smith wins the Heisman Trophy, yes or no?
I'm going to say no, just because I think that Sayan's going to split votes with him, and Ohio State will be really good, but I don't think they're going to have to pass as much as they need to.
We will see another team run the table 16-0 in 2026.
I'm going to say no. I think that the SEC and Big Ten are too strong right now. Miami's interesting, but I think the answer is no.
Last one. Does the SEC or the Big Ten get any bigger in the next 5 years?
I'm going to say no for 5 years. I think that 10 years is a more interesting question, though, because the contracts are up in 2030, 2031. I don't think there'll be any movement before that. I do think that I'm curious long-term what conferences look like after 2031. It might not even look like a Big Ten or SEC. It might be something completely different.
That is Shehan Jeyarajah, who is my favorite Baylor alumnus and a National College of Football writer at CBS Sports. Shehan, thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you so much for having me.